Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I've always found the politics of attraction to be very interesting, and I've always been intrigued and somewhat frustrated when I see certain people attracted to other people by virtue of certain appearances and statuses. Especially so when such attraction comes in real compromise to one's esteem, right? And I've talked about this a lot on this channel in relation to my severe disdain for pick-me's, people who pander severely to the sympathies of the opposite sex. I want you to be as comfortable as you can possibly be today. And guys, I always want you to be comfortable, but today I want you to be particularly at temperamental ease, even if it means you're just listening to this in the background. I say this because if anything irritates your conscience in relation to what I say, I want you to pay attention to it, because guys, I read all of the comments, and when I tell you that the invaluable perspective and honestly humility that is opportune in so many of the intelligent disagreements, add-ons, and just supplements to what I try to bring to public discussion on this channel is so necessary in softening the arrogance girding my own frame of mind, but also potentially any perspective stumbling across this channel. It is truly a gift of opportunity for self-detachment I didn't realize I needed, and I feel you could appreciate the same. I am interested, like many of you I'm sure, in the parameters to my own offense. True advocacy for freedom of speech comes with the necessary permission to offend. It is offensive to the frames that bind the original parameters of thought because it knocks against them and forces them to either retreat or to extend. Anyway, forgive the tangent, but seduction is obviously the more divisive of these interests because it touches on why people are abused, why others are in positions of influence, and it touches on why people are loved. This discussion is not exhaustive. I will do a part 2 if you like, but for now we will go over the deadliest mechanisms of seduction I have personally identified and feel to be of value in relation to how we approach the more delicate parts of human interaction. So without further ado, get yourself comfortable, get yourself a snack. I hope you're ready. Let's begin. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is intelligence and the attractions that surround people perceived to have invaluable perspective on any number of subjects. I see this most apparent in women, specifically women who are high in the personality trait openness. I am extremely high in openness, so yes, I am the problem here. But we are very much motivated not necessarily to perspective change, but to attraction based on how someone presents their thoughts in explicit relationship to how their mind works. Consciousness is incredibly diverse across human beings and obviously potential romantic interest, but there is a fascination we have in the way people's minds work, especially the least common and, by assumption, most adaptively complex ways of thinking. Not just that though, it's not just about a recognition of that difference in thinking from the common understanding of the way the rest of the world looks at things, but also a willingness to bear it out, reciprocate a prompting to discuss, and engage in commensurate interest to the other party's opinions. I would definitely say that this forms the basis of a lot of unconventional pairings, and I would say that it's incredibly powerful because it has the power to mask a lot of potential aversions like appearance. Not only that, but the higher you are as a female to openness, the less stringent your superficial preferences tend to be, like say height, body mass, or just general aesthetic presentation. These things tend to matter to a lesser extent because they just aren't the predominant chord of your bonding tendency. However, there is a problem. It masks more than just the superficial. The temptation of any intelligent character, right? The shadow lurking behind that frame is condescension. When a person of romantic interest is, more concerned in disabling your thought pattern than they are being romantically attracted to you, then you've exposed too much of your hand. Why? When someone with slight arrogance in their intelligent faculties, so with tendencies to subtle condescension, senses that your attraction is solidifying with remarkably little effort on your part, remember, they're just being themselves, they start losing respect for you. Even worse, when you're not the ideal female appearance-wise that they might be looking for. The malevolence in this form of seduction is that it overpasses intelligence for maturity, so it causes you to overlook and just not be very aware of the cues, subtle cues, that this guy might actually not be interested in you, romantically that is. It misses the subtle barbs of condescension you would otherwise be sensitive to. And while in a friendship or business context that could, it could easily be managed, in a romantic context that is deadly because you don't want that in a partner. Here is what I find usually happens. So here, this is what goes down. If you've bonded too quickly, and this isn't necessarily a problem, but you've misinterpreted certain condescensions and arrogances as, well, you haven't interpreted them at all. You're so hooked and fascinated by the way this man's mind works that they've flown completely over your head. And because he's smart, he knows he wields the upper hand now. And if, like many men with above average competence in any discipline, not just intelligence actually, he's given to the narcissistic shadow at the base of that trait, he is likely to take advantage of your attachment. When a man engages physically with a woman he doesn't respect, or at the very least does not respect enough to make explicit his non-attraction towards her, such that he forfeits the opportunity for sexual gratification, he will want nothing to do with her once the act, whatever it is over. Because it's not like he doesn't have a conscience. People with some tendencies to narcissism actually do have quite strong consciences and sensitivities to injustice, but the disdain they now harbor against such a woman is amplified because of the recognition of the unfairness they have just participated in. It's a shame he now directs towards himself. You will now be on the receiving end of that, and it is scathing. You know, a lot of women do struggle to survive that. It's a strange combination of cold withdrawal, and then sometimes it's followed up by cruelty. He knows it was easy from the start. He knows that you were hooked. Even if you didn't necessarily agree with everything he said, you were fascinated by his mind. And he knows that he exploited your willingness to say yes, knowing full well that he wasn't there emotionally where you were, yet he still chose to engage in that extremely compromising act. And these are men who usually do have very strong principles, but his awareness to a certain violation of his own moral compass is almost too painful to settle within himself. So he'd rather you be on the receiving end of that. And you missed that tendency to boy-like cowardice from the beginning because you mistook that competence he had on an intellectual level for maturity. The minute, and guys, you sense condescension in any romantic interest, you need to cut it off and preserve your emotional interest. To summarize, romantic interest with above average incompetence, high openness, so an avid interest in ideas, philosophies, and abstractions, are often tempted to narcissism if they are not mature enough to suffocate that shadow. And they might exploit the leverage that competence affords them in order to satisfy some superficial urge, like, say, sex. But it's not always sex. It really could be anything that they potentially could see that they could get from you, but it's not you. So then what is the solution? Look for someone who expresses, commensurate interest in your mind, the way you think, what motivates your feelings, to your interest in his or hers. It's their actions that are effective, not necessarily their words. Watch how they receive compliments. And by the way, you should be openly addressing the things of appreciation within the person that you're interested in, because that prevents against a self-concern that, again, if you're competent too in whatever discipline happens to be the discipline of interest here, because it fights against your own shadow of arrogance and potential conceit. I think we need to train ourselves to not reduce people as potential objects to our, intellectual stimulation, and instead subjects of individual humanity. The former perspective, right, the eye of self-interest and fascination with one's mind, which you find yourself attracted to someone, is actually the underlying core of a type of objectification. Seduction of intelligence exclusively, right, with disregard to the other parts of what make them is actually a form of objectification, and it is deadly. The second form of objectification is its more explicit form, but it is just as deadly. I am going to circle back to my favorite classics, which I have discussed comprehensively in previous videos. You are more than welcome to check them out. But when it comes to a man's conception of the ideal woman, this ideal is very much tied to her physical appearance and how her temperament should act as a comfort to his sorest turmoils. Because this ideal is such a stabilizer for him, it functions in completion to his own soul, but it neglects to recognize what is masked behind that ideal. What is imposed subconsciously onto the female romantic interest is an expectation to alleviate, to comfort, and to maintain palatable appearances for the growth of his character exclusively and for the length of the entire relationship. This preserves the female ideal in static form, right? A form that actually limits what she can mature to in adaptation to her environment, because there is an assumption, an unfortunate bias, if you will, as supported by the soft, infantilized aesthetic that she presents, that she doesn't have demons or darknesses of her own that she has to wrestle with. That wrestling in and of itself, as it transformed you, will transform her, and it must transform her, because the trajectory to female maturity is as necessary and as brutal as the path to a man's reconciliation with certain darknesses. This, and yes, we're relating this back to my favorite classics and specifically Greek myths, this is Orpheus leading up the ghost of his dead wife life after she was killed by her own childlike whims while wandering into the forest on the day of their wedding. It is him looking at her, disturbing the materialization of ghost to flesh, a human being with autonomy and interest to her own maturity outside the context of his own pains, and limiting her being to an extension of his own soul. It is selfish. It is cruel. To objectify truly is to see someone as an object to your own satisfactions, a curative solve to your happiness, to your comfort, to your traumas. And often what happens is her beauty, her superficial presentation, masks what really lies beneath that facade. A self-concerned little girl whose only interest is protection. It is deadly because in the absence of that provision, she might betray, she might cheat, she might lie, she might manipulate, hop from guy to guy in order to find someone who satisfies those most immediate cravings and insecurities for the moment, right? These are calls for immediate attention that only come from a girl who is yet to mature into a woman. It is incredibly childlike, but you don't see that because you only see the facade of beauty. And like King Arthur, you could rule all the kingdoms of the world, but if your expectation that she satisfy you begins to suffocate her because you've burdened your responsibility to maturity on her, and your attraction to her superficial aesthetics has blinded you to the villainous, self-concerned parts of her immature form that will betray you once you stop providing her the money, the charm, or the esteem that she craves, in that immaturity, by the way, that you simultaneously confine her to, then your story will end in the most pitiable ruinations. You will find yourself bitter, resentful, and tired because you preyed on the superficial and the superficial preyed on you. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this little installment. Please like, subscribe, and please share your opinions in the comment section down below. I will be reading them, and I hope to see you next time. You take care and goodbye.